Welcome to the Ceremon Valley Democratic Club. My name is Brody Hilp. I serve as president. I'm here today with Vice President Richard Adler and our tech director, Cecilia Manalga. We are so glad you joined us tonight. We are honored to have our congressman, our beloved congressman. He's one of the most progressive, Mark DeSaulnier, join us tonight, and we can't wait to hear him speak. And he will speak in just a few minutes, but first I want to recognize Pride Month. It began with the Stonewall riots in June of 1969 when police arrested people at a gay nightclub in New York repeatedly. The LGBT community sprung into action and demonstrated for weeks to assert their rights. This movement was the catalyst for later activism. Since that date, there has been remarkable progress, including historic Supreme Court decisions that have struck down regressive laws, affirmed the right to marriage equality, and secured workplace protections. Moreover, members of the LGBT community now serve in nearly every level of public office, in city halls, in state capitals, governor's mansions, and the halls of the Congress. During LGBT Pride Month, we recognize the resilience and determination of the many individuals who have fought for and continue to fight for full equity and the right to live freely and authentically. I want to thank Ken Richard for his help in writing this statement. And we also want to celebrate our new federal holiday, Juneteenth, and commemorate June 19th, 1865, the day federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, to free the remaining enslaved people, nearly 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed into law. But the Emancipation Proclamation only freed slaves in the Confederate States. Those in states not fighting the Union, such as Texas and the northern states, were not included. Slavery ended in those states with the ratification of the 13th Amendment in December 1865. But Blacks were still not free. The amendment abolished slavery, but allowed for a type of slavery. Those convicted of a crime could be forced into free labor. Hundreds of white men were hired by Southern states as police officers to arrest Blacks. If a Black person did not have employment, he could be arrested and convicted of a crime. Once arrested and convicted, Black men and their families could be leased to work on plantations. It is estimated that 800,000 Blacks were in this prison system, providing free or rather enslaved labor, such as the chain gangs working on the railroads, until it was abolished around 1940. Though we've come a long way in our nation's history, we must be clear that Black people continue to face racism today, directly and systemically. We need to acknowledge that and make efforts, a true commitment to end our discriminatory criminal justice system, end police brutality, and end systemic racism, leading to inequalities in housing, income, education, and our healthcare system. We as a club will strive to push for legislation whose goal is freedom, equity, and justice for Black people in America. And I want to add that we applaud our District Attorney, Dinah Beckton, for implementing criminal justice reform in Contra Costa County. For example, she has proactively dismissed thousands of old marijuana convictions in support of an individual's successful return to the community. She has created the first standalone conviction integrity unit. This unit investigates prior convictions and seeks justice for the wrongly convicted. She has diverted many individuals to substance abuse treatment and other relevant programs and services. As a club, we supported her campaign for district attorney in 2018, where she defeated the candidate endorsed by the Republicans, Paul Graves. In February of this year, she spoke at our club meeting, And this spring, the Ceremon Valley Democratic Club again donated $1,000 to Dinah Becton's campaign for the election in 2022. And we ask that you too consider making a donation to her campaign. I will put the information and the link into chat. Now, we also have we have an important ballot measure to vote on this year. The desperate Republicans trying to be elected in the state of California have a ballot measure to recall our governor, Gavin Newsom. Cecilia Manalga will explain what we need to do. Pay attention. It could affect who our senators in Congress are. Cecilia, thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Brody. And I just want to make sure, hopefully you guys can see my screen here.
Yes.
Okay. So yes, we need to stop that Republican recall. And what can we do? What I'll do is I'll just talk a little bit about what the recall is and then just give some ideas. It'll be pretty quick. But it is a Republican scheme, and I use that word. It has been bankrolled by the wealthy big donors and national Republicans, including $250,000 from the Republican National Committee. And it's filled with, all the supporters are filled with the QAnon believers, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, all of those alleged patriots. And it's also costing about $100 million, which is distracting us from money that we could use otherwise. One of the things I really want to mention about this also is that, you know, if that didn't all scare you enough, if we get a Republican governor, he or she will have the ability to appoint a new Republican senator should anything happen to Feinstein or Padilla, and we will lose the Senate. So that is the really big thing in here that we need to really pay attention to. What does the recall ballot look like? So it's really a very simple ballot. There's two questions. There's the first question is, should Gavin Newsom be recalled? And I just noticed there's some hands raised. Let me just go through this and we can talk about some questions at the end. There's two questions on the ballot. Should Governor Gavin Newsom be recalled? Yes or no? And we want to vote no. If and only if question number one succeeds, remember a no vote, excuse me, in order to succeed, it needs 50% plus one vote. It requires a majority vote. And if the answer is yes, Governor Newsom should be recalled, then the next question comes into play as to who the candidate with the most votes wins. Now, this is also very scary to me. They don't have to have a majority. It's just whoever has the most votes. So you could have someone win with 15% of the vote. If we have people vote to recall Governor Newsom. So that's scary. And I don't know if you can see here, but all of this fine print over here, that's what the 2003 ballot looked like. All of the people voting or running against Gray Davis. So it can look pretty nasty. A little bit about the recall, remembering that recalls are the California GOP's only viable path to get a Republican in the governor's office. Governor Newsom was elected with over almost 62% of the vote. And it has been noted that 57% of likely voters will vote no on the recall. And 61% of Governor Newsom's approve of Governor Newsom's handling of the pandemic. So that all means that this is all about voter education and mobilization. I'm not going to go into all of the things that Governor Newsom has done and there's certainly a lot of articles out there about his records, but there is certainly a favorable opinion of Governor Newsom's handling of many things, including the handling of the COVID-19 crisis. We have one of the most robust vaccination programs in the country. Plus, we have equitably distributed vaccines. We have the largest small business grant program in the nation. He expanded paid sick leave to every Californian during the pandemic, and there's much more. Governor Newsom certainly is someone we want to keep. So all of this was pretty scary, but what can you do to stop the recall? I think the most important thing is every one of us, all 30 some people who are on the call right now, need to start talking to your friends and family right away to make sure you know how important it is to vote no and to stop the recall. There's also, money always helps, so show your support for Governor Newsom. We have text messages, and there's also some formal volunteering that you can do. I'll put these links in the chat so that you can see them as well and copy them down. But as I mentioned, the most important thing is talking to your friends and family, because we will only win if we vote. There's more Democrats than Republicans in the state. There's Democratic voters outnumber Republican voters 46 to 24%, and independents lean Democratic in California. But that only counts if we vote. Otherwise, because the Republicans and Fox News are really going after this. So what can you do? Talk to your friends and family. What I might suggest is all of us know 5 people. So reach out to those 5 people, whether they're a next door neighbor, a friend, a family member. A lot of people we've noticed don't really know that this recall is going on, and they don't think it's that important because they know that people like Governor Newsom, and so they just kind of brush it off. Well, that is, if we don't get people out to vote, the Republicans will win. So reach out to them, make sure that they know that the recall election is going on. Think about how you usually communicate with them so that you know how to reach out. And let them know what you think about the recall and have that conversation, because this is going to take mobilization across the state. So that was a real quick overview of the recall, to stop the Republican recall. But I'm happy to, I know our senator has joined, there he is. And excuse me, our House of Representatives, I just gave you a promotion. I don't know if we have time for maybe a couple questions or something about the recall.
So Cecilia, if we waited 1 year, we could save $100 million, right?
Yes.
Incredible.
And I think, Linda, did you have your hand up for a question? Or no, Christina.
Hi, this is Christina. I just joined the club and kind of new to
welcome.
this, so I might have some naive questions.
No.
And Brody's been so great and sending me all kinds of information that I've a lot to digest. So I just put the link, but I just saw that article. And granted, it's the patch, so when I see it from a more credible news source, I might really believe it. But does that mean it's going forward, or what you were talking about, there's a ballot first to vote? Can you explain a little bit more about that process?
Yes, the ballot is going to happen. It's still under discussion, at least as of yesterday. Things change, so I don't know if that's changed. But as of yesterday, they do not have a date yet. It will probably be in August or September timeframe.
Okay.
But the date TBD, but it is definitely going forward.
So does that mean we're voting for the recall to happen, or that is actually the recall and we're voting whether
we will be voting yes or no? Do we want to vote? Do we want to recall Governor Newsom?
Okay. And
that
then
is correct. And we all want to put no.
Right, obviously. But so if he gets more yeses than nos, then what happens then? Then they presented.
And they go to, there's only two questions on the ballot. One is the yes or no for the recall. And then if it's the 50% plus one says yes, then the second question gets tabulated, and that is who wins.
Okay. So it would happen right then. Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you for clarifying. But
Thank you.
It's confusing. Yeah.
Thank you.
And that is so important, Christina, why your questions there is so important, because you're very engaged, you're very political, and so many people don't really realize that this is happening and have the same questions that you had, because they think, oh, well, I'll wait for, next year when we're talking about, Governor Newsom or some other thing that they might think about. So it's important that we get the word out.
Thank you, Cecilia. And we had Mark right here, and he just stood up. There he is. Mark, we're so happy. We're so thrilled that you could join us. We are honored. You are our beloved congressman. You're progressive. We love you. And so thank you for being here tonight.
Great. You want me to just dig in, Brody?
Yes, please.
Well, I want to give time for questions. First of all, thank you, Brody, for inviting me. I can't wait until we can start doing these in person again, so we can enjoy our senses of humor and unique personalities in person. How's that for a political comment? So you asked a little bit. I just want to sort of give you an update and a feel for what's happening. For me personally, I am on 4 committees. Jamie Raskin from Maryland, who's a dear friend, who's our impeachment leader in the second impeachment, just a brilliant colleague. Both of us are on 4 committees. Congressional Quarterly did a story that said I was the busiest member of Congress, which I'm very proud of. It got me in trouble with some of my colleagues because I had to tell them I didn't say that about myself. The reporters. We're a very competitive group, in case you haven't noticed, as politicians. So I'm busy, and I'll just go through sort of, because as you all know, I think the way you're successful in most jobs, but particularly in legislative jobs, and for sure in the House of Representatives and Congress, is you develop expertise in areas where you have expertise stored up over time, or that you want to focus on. So transportation infrastructure, as you all know, I've had a long relationship with transportation at the local level. At the state level, I chaired both transportation committees in the legislature. I had the distinction in the assembly of being the first freshman in the history of the state of California to chair the Assembly Transportation Committee. And then I chaired first the Labor Committee on the policy side, and then the Transportation and Housing Committee. And now I'm on Transportation Infrastructure and Legislature. I have a very close relationship with the chairman, Peter DeFazio, who, like me, is a former Bostonian who moved to the West Coast. He originally went to grad school during the 70s in San Francisco at San Francisco State, and then he now represents Oregon. A wonderful, wonderful member, very smart. Still a little cranky. He's got more of the New England in him. We had one colleague from Boston who once said to Peter and I in front of one another, he said, what happened to you, DeFazio? You went to the West Coast and you didn't mellow out. You stayed like a cranky New Englander. DeSaulnier became all California nice, and he's mellowed out. So a wonderful, wonderful friend. We have been very engaged in infrastructure bills. Great working relationship with the administration. It is unbelievable how different it is, just in terms of competence and focus. I mean, you've got a real mature public servant in Joe Biden, and it's very much reflected in his appointees. And I am fortunate to have really good relationships. I just had a wonderful conversation with Javier Becerra, our former AG, former colleague of mine who became good friends, who's now Secretary of Health and Human Services. We work on closely on a number of issues in that area. But on T&I, I've had a number of conversations now with Secretary Buttigieg, really good things in that regard. So I had a great conversation with Marty Walsh, and we made fun of his existing Boston accent and mine that has gone away, Marty, Secretary of Labor. So really a great, I mean, it's so different. I mean, I know you all see, and we're all appreciative of not having the constant craziness. But the other side that you don't see is the competence, the quiet competence of helping people, getting things done, being thoughtful. But is a big hole to fill. And I want to talk to you more about that because we're in a war for democracy still. And I physically saw that battle, the insurrection. It was very clear what was going on there to me. So we can talk about that a little bit later. But on the T&I side, I can't brag too much because in politics, you don't brag until you actually get things done. I've got it out of the Committee of Jurisdiction, the T&I committee in the House. We were very successful in a number of local projects that I've been involved with for 30 years around systems management that shows a lot of potential. The software, when you come to corridor management and the overall systems management and the balkanization of every city having its own transportation management system and not communicating well, the software is becoming exponentially more sophisticated. So I have a couple of initiatives that I think will be very helpful in the 680, the 24, and the 4 corridor in terms of coordinating. And this has all been in partnership with the Contra Costa Transportation Agency and with the cities. So we're coordinating and improving all of our software. So we'll be able to move people more quickly, more efficiently. And then on bigger projects, I was the author of what's called a Clean Corridor Project, one where I have a lot of history because as you all know, I was on the Air Resources Board for 10 years, been very involved in alternative fuels. This project, I wrote it as a grant project. In California, we've done a remarkable job, but we're still way behind on providing the infrastructure. And this is a chicken and egg problem when it comes to changing our fleet from fossil fuel to battery and fuel cell. We've been at it for a long time. California's been the model. I've worked closely with my staff, with the Air Resources Board staff, and both with the Brown administration, Mary Nichols, and with the Newsom administration. So we introduced this in the legislature. We put it in as a package, and the administration's all over it. It went from a grant program of a couple $100 million to now multiple billions of dollars. And it's both the administration and the committee's priorities. The Chinese are adding $100,000 of these alternative fuel stations to their infrastructure a month. They have 800, 900,000 of these in the world. The United States has 40,000. We have a lot of them here in the Bay Area. As the money moves in Ford and General Motors, in Toyota and Honda, all the car companies know what's happening here. They're putting their money towards alternative fuels, battery electric and fuel cells. Toyota and the Japanese are focusing more on the fuel cell side. But the chicken and egg part is, if we don't have the infrastructure installed, they can't buy the product. We know about range anxiety. We're extending the range for batteries, but you got to get chargers out there. So this, to me, is a culmination of years on the transportation side. Another big bill we had that's included is working with the French and the Japanese, having over the years talked to them. I've had meetings with the Minister of Transportation in Tokyo on this in my previous iterations, is changing our land use patterns and being smarter about it, but not letting the value of the public sector's infrastructure investment disappear into the private sector. It's called value capture. The rest of the world does this. Tax increment financing and redevelopment, property tax is part of it, but that's only one component. So the French and the Japanese, a third of their operating costs for high-speed rail and intercity rail, and they have the world-class systems, come from the value of the property around these investments. Our bill, complicated, wonkish, but it's part of this big infrastructure bill. And the administration's been fabulous on it. When you think of the Bay Area for future development and getting more affordable housing and workforce housing for younger people, it's the Capital Corridor, the Altamont, and prospectively the Pacheco Pass. So we need to start working on those now. So we're smart about moving people. And it works out really nicely in the future of the House and our majority, because the voters that will determine the future of the House for the next several generations are suburban swing voters and ex-urban voters. When they see that we're the ones who are trying to make their lives easier, get them off of the freeway, get them in, give them choices, and reduce carbon. This is a big part of our carbon inventory. Then they'll vote for us. We've seen this in Northern Virginia. We see it with the Denham seat. Convincing those people who have 2-hour commutes both ways that we're doing something about it, and we have their sense of urgency, and it benefits us on multiple levels. All of this will be built with good paying, apprenticeship approved union jobs that provide value at good livable wages. So they're all supportive, and it gets us the carbon reductions that are amongst the most difficult that we have to do if we're going to save this planet and change the trajectory of carbon. Last piece on that package, and I'll try to be faster here, is a request for just transition grants, something I've been very involved in. I'd love to work with you folks on. Here in Contra Costa, we've got 4 refineries. They provide good paying union jobs, but we need to transition those jobs out. We need to not forget our brothers and sisters who work there. And these are state-of-the-art jobs. The refinery industry didn't want to do the safety, air quality, and workforce safety that we insisted they do. We, the Bay Area, I'm proud author of something called the Industrial Safety Ordinance that's been remarkable for 25 years. The state of New Jersey is in the process of approving it word for word. The state of California passed it. But this transition is important for us politically. We have a real challenge between our environmental constituency and our working constituency. And we have it here in Contra Costa. So getting them all on the same page, not leaving people behind is what we did in West Virginia, and getting prepared for the transition away from fossil fuels. So those are 3 big things that I've been successful with that I'm really proud of, and my staff. On the educational labor side, transition's a big part of it. I am now chair of a subcommittee, very important subcommittee of education labor. It's called the Health Subcommittee. It's Health, Employment, Labor, and Pensions. We just had a great hearing on pensions. We got into partisan bickering, but we did get the Republicans to focus with the experts, including their witness from the Heritage Foundation, that Americans in the richest country in the richest world in the history of this planet deserve to have a secure retirement. And we got to protect Social Security, but we also have to protect the retirement system and strengthen it. So I'm working very hard on that. Education is the future of this country. We had a great hearing with the new Secretary of Education. Talk about a change. Betty DeVos to Secretary Cardenas. I mean, Betty DeVos, I had these exchanges with where I was speechless on the stupidity. She was ripping the public education system apart. We have to rebuild it. And we are, one of our big initiatives is attracting and retaining teachers. If we don't have high quality, the best and the brightest going into public teaching, we won't have the best education system, and we won't have democracy, in my view, in this country. On the Oversight Committee, I've got 2 big initiatives. One, Secretary or Chairman Maloney, and before her, Elijah Cummings, a dear friend. I went after the Sackler family and the opioid crisis. I've got a lot of credit for it. We have a very important bill. We just had 2 hearings, one where we subpoenaed the 2 Sackler. If you know anything about the opioid crisis, lots of good writing on this. An absolute disgrace. They knew what they were doing. We've got the emails. There's multiple attorney generals suing them, including Rob Bonta and Javier Becerra before him. Big thing for me, and it's really encouraging. We've got to hold people who have this kind of responsibility and this kind of wealth personally accountable. They're trying to get out of it every way they can. But what they did to the American public in addicting them to opioids and Oxycontin is unbelievable. A similar thing, not quite as direct, but also quite horrible, is Juul. Unfortunately, a Bay Area company that I have got on national TV because I lost my temper with one of the founders, 2 graduates of the Stanford School of Design who were quite evil, in my view, of developing a delivery system that has created what the Surgeon General has described as a youth smoking epidemic. and they targeted young people. So we just had a hearing yesterday with the new FDA director and was able to engage in that. So oversight, educational labor, T&I, and then the Rules Committee gives me the ability to be involved in every piece of legislation that goes through the House. So it creates more leverage, quite frankly, and allows me to have input on every bill that goes through. I have a very close relationship with the chairman, Jim McGovern, a wonderful Massachusetts member from Worcester, Massachusetts, of where I spent my 4 years in college. And I was really moved by the fact that my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, led by Chairman McGovern, just made me the vice chair of that committee to replace a dear friend, Elsie Hastings, who just died of pancreatic cancer. So I'm busy, I'm engaged. Let me just finish with why it's so important and to follow up on the conversation about the recall. The sense of entitlement and the lack of ethics by the Republican Party right now is a real and present danger to democracy. What they did on the census, just had a fundraiser with my dear friend Karen Bass just a few hours ago. What the Trump administration, in spite of what we did, and I had a lot to do with this in the Oversight Committee and had some really good exchanges with another real dimwit billionaire, Wilbur Ross, former Secretary of Commerce, thank God he's gone. We would still have 54 representatives in the United States House of Representatives looking at redistricting and the new census if they hadn't so willfully attacked California and other progressive states. So we were able to only lose one because of what we did, but redistricting will cost us a little bit of influence. But this is why it's so important. We're at war, folks, to the future of democracy. If they get control of the House, they only need 6 votes. The history is against us statistically. Most parties who are in the majority in the House when their party controls the White House lose the midterms. If we lose the midterms, Kevin McCarthy will be Speaker, and they haven't changed. I thought they would start to moderate themselves after January 6th, but they voted against having an independent commission. They voted not to certify the election the same day that they were physically, they brought the insurrectionist into the US Capitol. I was there. I came very close to being apprehended by that crowd. This is the fight for our democracy, and they're going to do anything to get control. And if they win the majority in a year and a half, it's going to open a pathway for Trump to run again in 2024. We can't let that happen. We've got to be fully engaged. And to your last speaker on the recall, we got to make sure everybody understands the urgency. They understood it last time, but I think there's a tendency to think we got rid of that, everything will be fine. We didn't get rid of that. It's waiting to come back. And can you imagine what he would be like with control of both houses of the Congress in a second term after what he was like in the first term? So I'll stop there. I know I've talked too long, but you're kindred spirits. I want to fill you in on what's happening. I'm very excited. I'm grateful for your prayers, your support, and I'm all engaged. I have to tell my staff I was pretty crazy before I almost died. And now I spend a lot of time in therapy going, I want to use every moment that I have representing you, doing the best I can to make sure I have a say in defending democracy and making it better, because it's all going to change if we can get through the next 4 years, I think, because the demographics are on our side, young people are on our side, and on all of the issues. When the Labor Caucus had a hearing with the national head of the building trades, and he talked about how on all of the Democratic issues, when we explain it to working people in Ohio and Pennsylvania, West Virginia, they're on our side. So we have to do a better job of letting them know that we're on our side. But we have to fight like hell because the other side is unmoored in terms of its total lack of ethical and social responsibility. They actually are the opposite. They think we're suckers for being ethical. And they think if you screw people and mislead them, then too bad. That's the way to run this country. And I don't know about you, but at this point in my life, that's not the country I want to leave for my kids. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mark. That was quite a lot. I have a lot of questions because you spoke so fast. I'm not sure if I understood it all, but I want to open it up to questions in our members. I think we have one that our first one was from Sharon and Ellis Goldberg. Would you like to ask it?
Only if Ellis is wearing my favorite hat.
I'm sorry, Mark, I left it upstairs.
You want me to go get it?
But she's willing to get it.
No, I'm joking. Don't.
No.
That's
Sit
okay.
down, Sharon. Anyhow, SEC Chair Janet Yellen can require corporations to disclose political spending. I understand she has the power to do that without asking anybody else, just signature. That would go a long way to giving us clean money. About half of the corporations that are publicly traded do disclose political spending in their annual report. Those are typically the good guys. The bad guys, like Chevron, don't disclose that. And even when the stockholders have proposed that they disclose it, it got voted down by the big money at the stockholders meetings. Could you ask Janet Yellen, do me a favor, ask the corporations, require the corporations to disclose their political spending?
Yeah, really good point, Ellis, as always. I will check with Congressman Jayapal, who's a dear friend, who's chair of the Progressive Caucus, which I'm very active in. I am surprised that we've been really aggressive on these things. There's a series of bills that just came out of David Cicilline's subcommittee, a wonderful friend that I've worked closely with. He's the chair of the Antitrust Committee and the Judiciary Committee. So we're getting a little pushback on those bills, but these are some of the components about sunshine that we feel very strongly, even this Supreme Court can undermine. So yeah, I will follow up with that because it's what levers we have to use. And as I've talked to this group before, Dark Money showed us that book and her years of research. The Koch brothers took over the Republican Party with independent expenditures, and nobody knew where the money was coming from. And then Donald Trump came along and took the party away from them. So people need to know, as you know, I work very close with John Sarbanes. I'm a co-author of HR 1. I just saw him a while ago in a Zoom meeting, having a heck of a time in the Senate. But we are going to get a bill, I think. I don't think we'll get Republican support. We may. Manchin has a compromise that I'm not crazy about, but and this is where they're working full time. The voter suppression stuff, we actually, Progressive Caucus has the Democratic caucus from the Texas legislature in our meeting tomorrow to talk about their efforts and how they stopped a lot of the laws that Governor Abbott and others were trying to pass to mess with this system. So big, important stuff.
Thank you. Marty Roach, you have a question? You're on mute.
I just started chatting away. Hi, Mark. You
Mark.
covered your bills pretty fast, and I know one of them was your corridors bill, the transportation bill, and the other was the just transition bill. Do you have any sense of the challenges and the opportunities for getting them to the floor on a vote? Or are there other ways that a lot of the creative, the ideas you have in those bills are so creative. Are there other ways for some of those ideas to show up in other legislation, or how do you see that unfolding so that we can really see some of these changes you're talking about?
Well, one of the things, and I've talked to you folks about this before, the shock of shocks to me to be able to go to an institution I revere and follow a mentor who I revered, who was so great at this, George Miller. It wasn't easy to get bills passed in the legislature, but compared to Congress, it wasn't just because we were in the majority. And a lot of the time I was in the legislature, we didn't have a supermajority. So we had to work for a lot of things, and particularly revenue, to get the 5-6 votes we needed to get the supermajority is required by the California Constitution. In Congress with Mitch McConnell and these guys around, they're not libertarians. They want to break the system. And by the way, the damage that they did in this past administration to the infrastructure, the good public servants, Republicans and Democrats who work for EPA, HUD, they're gone. And we have to rebuild that. And this was all by design. This is the Koch brothers. What's the name? The tax pledge. This has been
Grover
years.
Norquist.
Grover Norquist, drown government in a bathtub. So this is another part of why you are so important in your activism. This isn't something that's just going to blow away after the fourth quarter is over when we win the election. These guys are methodical, and they're getting help from people like Putin, and they're facilitating that help. So on these bills, one of the things about Congress right now is I introduce a lot of bills. I have my CEO bill that I did with Bob Reich in the legislature. Bernie Sanders has a similar bill that he blatantly copied from me, but I'll forgive him. That is, you remember that CEO bill, it changed the tax rate for core publicly traded companies who compensate their CEO at over 100 times what their average worker works. Really great idea. But the idea of getting that through a filibuster, 60 votes in the Senate is, here there's this window of opportunity with this administration, the rescue plan where we did so much, and the infrastructure plans. So what I think is going to happen, to answer your question, is I think we're going to get a bipartisan one bite of the apple that will get Republican votes in the Senate. That will be more, I think broadband will be included, highways, transit, although Republicans have never been big fans of transit because it mostly serves urban areas. If they have half a brain politically, they will, because as I mentioned, ex-urban and suburban commuters are a lot of where the future of the House for the next decade will be decided. So we're going to get some things, but we won't get early education. We won't get childcare. We won't get elder care and support. We will get some climate change, but not much. So that will have to come in a reconciliation package. The parliamentarian in both houses has said to the administration and to our leadership that they would approve a physical bill under the rules on a simple majority in both houses. So I think that's where, and the president mentioned this today. I haven't been able to read everything about it because I've been busy today, but the president mentioned today, and this I think is somewhat a response to a letter that the Progressive Caucus sent just a couple days ago, where we said, don't take us for granted. You're working with mods, you're working with Republicans, that's all good. But sometimes there's a tendency in our caucus to say, well, the best Democrats are the progressive ones and they'll come along with us anyways. And what we've been trying to say is we're not ideologues. We believe very strongly and passionately about the social contract, and we want to fight to get that back into this country. But don't take us for granted. So what we said was we sent a letter for the Progressive Caucus and said, just so you know, when you're counting votes, we're not going to support an infrastructure bill or a reconciliation bill if it doesn't have climate change in it, if it doesn't have infrastructure for working women and families. One of the key things about infrastructure is the Republicans want to define it on a social model from 60 years ago. One career, one commute, the man working in a house and the woman being subservient, but being the nurturer of our children, and frequently being the caregivers, educators, and being underpaid. They want to go back to that model. And my argument is that model's gone, for better and worse, mostly for better. So infrastructure is defined by economists, historically has been the public investment that provides for productive workforce. Well, today, when you have, I think it's 82% of women who have children 0 to 14 have full-time jobs. 82%, 30 years ago, it was 14%. So that's a different social model. in order to have women and men be productive in this model, the infrastructure has to be affordable, safe, high quality, early education. You have to have that. And for the long term of what we know about cognitive development and the public education system, you have to have that. They don't want to include that. They think that's nanny, woman's work. Sorry, those are those expressions. The Biden administration has been fabulous on insisting on taking care of seniors. A really interesting study by the Kaiser Foundation, just released a few weeks ago, showed that people over 65, life expectancy for all Americans has gone down. And a lot of it has to do with those diseases of despair. But for people over 65, the United States is 13th out of national ranks, according to Kaiser. But if you take the West Coast of the United States, that's really interesting for us. We're number one. Our life expectancy is growing exponentially. And for people my age who've gone through what I went through last year, I read this kind of stuff. The New York Times did a great article on this in a Sunday magazine 2 weeks ago, just about how much life expectancy has changed in the last 150 years. 150 years ago, it was 30 years old. Now it's almost 80, and we can expect that to grow. But we have to invest in taking care of people as they get older. The Republicans will say, oh, well, they're working, seniors are working more than ever. You make them work at shitty jobs and you don't give them benefits and you're killing them, literally killing them. So this is a really, really important part of what we're arguing for. With more pressure on young people for mobility to get jobs, housing costs, that fabric where, you know, when I grew up in Massachusetts, all of my cousins, uncles, my grandparents, my great-grandparents all lived within 15 minutes of each other. That was a great social model, but it doesn't exist anymore. So we have to support the change. So these are big, big things. Part of the discussion with the Secretary of Education today is a lot of things in these bills and the working families bills for education. And it's really, really important. And for career development for people, the best and the brightest to go into public education. So sorry to be so wordy, but you can tell them this is, he's my predecessor. I'm like, I wake up from literally, I'm Rip Van Winkle. I wake up from a horrible nightmare. I come out of the ICU and all of a sudden Joe Biden's president and the world's changed, but we got to take advantage of this and we got to hold on to it as long as we can and really be productive.
Thank you, Mark. Wow. I had a question submitted in advance to the meeting, and so I'd like to read it to you. It says, the Fairness Doctrine worked at keeping media honest and balanced. It was canceled by President Reagan. We desperately need a Fairness Doctrine that will include social media. I believe much of our current problems exist because people only read their leanings and get them reinforced and exaggerated. What about a bill on this? Many of us would like to help you work on it. So is there anything about any idea about the Fairness Doctrine idea?
Yes, and I am working on a bill myself, but there is an existing bill. The process to be collegial is if you have an interest in a bill like this, which I have for a long time, is you find out from legislative counsel who amongst the current members has introduced a similar bill first. Same thing happens in the legislature. If you're collegial, you go to them and figure out how you can work with them. So this is a big, big thing to me. I started a task force on local news with David Cicilline, and David and I have worked on this quite a bit. The Alden Financial Group is a big problem when it comes to information. They own the Bay Area News Group that used to be the Contra Costa Times and the Oakland Tribune. How people get information and how they digest it is enormously important. I learned this from the Mueller report and what Putin did to use social media. This is a real threat to our democracy as well, and it's being used and has been used. So we need to reinstate the Fairness Doctrine. The Energy and Commerce Committee just had a hearing on algorithms. A lot of good writing on this. I'm very engaged with a number of people, including David and Silicon Valley people, about how do we fix this. The sophistication of algorithms and how it's being used in neuroscience and triggering our amygdala, it's 40% more likely that you'll get somebody to purchase your product and go to your advertising if you upset them. So they know what they're doing, and we've got to stop it. And the Fairness Doctrine would be a very powerful, elegant way of us making news providers go back to where they were utility, and they had to be balanced. And if they weren't, they'd lose their license. And your point about social media, it has to be part of social media. I have a bill with David Cicilline that would require social media to simply do what the television industry, the radio industry, the movie industry does for recording artists and for film producers. And that is, you got to pay them a license every time you use the product. So every time the New York Times, somebody puts one of their articles on a Facebook post, Facebook takes that information, but they don't compensate the New York Times. So our bill just says you've got to negotiate this in good faith. And Facebook's fighting us like hell with moderate Democrats. They don't want us to do that. So they're controlling information. And if you control information, you know, that old expression, knowledge is power. Well, this is power. So it's really, really important.
Wow. Who are some of the moderate Democrats that are defending Facebook?
I'll let you do your own research, but
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
and actually, there's some good articles today as a response to Cicilline's bills, and there are some people I respect in there. So, you know, you got to listen. Maybe you made mistakes when you did. Maybe you overreached. Nobody's perfect, including members of Congress and progressives. And this is a new kind of beast. If you, there's a lot of good writing on this, and
Isn't there like something like Section 230 that newspapers have to have a balance in their reporting? But social media, they got rid of that,
Yep.
that Section 230. Is there any talk about bringing back Section 230?
Yes, and there are bills, and I think David has this one in his package that eliminates that. The idea was, it's sort of like not charging the Amazon sales tax in California originally, is the same argument. Well, this is new technology, so let us get our sea legs, so to speak, and then come in. And then, you know, now that they've been wildly successful, they don't want to do what they agreed to 10 years ago. So it's an unfortunate part of human nature. But yeah, we have to close that. A lot of these tools to correct this aren't terribly innovative. They're tried and true, like the Fairness Doctrine, like 230. So a good example of this that we've done in the rescue plan is the child earned income credit and the child credit that Rosa DeLaura and Nancy put in the rescue plan, but we got to keep it in. It would raise almost a third of kids in the United States out of poverty. It's only something like $5,000 a year, and that tells you how poor kids are. Or can be. And it was just an elegant change. It all can be enforced with current enforcement and infrastructure. So there's a lot of things that were undone that we can do, but we have to have the political will, and we need advocates like you who are knowledgeable to help us with this. And the more we can help you with this, not just when I come by, but I'll get Chanel to work with you and with Katie, with the Central Committee and with the clubs, so that we can be better connected, so you can follow this, and you don't require me to come and be long-winded at these wonderful meetings. We can do it online and connect you and sort of help connect you to where you can help us influence people.
Well, I'm glad that you and Cicilline are working on that, and I will be happy to be kept abreast of that and tell our members and get involved to help you. We have a question from Shirley Shelongoski.
Okay, my question is, I know that you and other Democrats write really good bills, but anything can be challenged in the court. What's your opinion of adding 4 justices to the Supreme Court with the Judiciary Act?
I support it.
Great.
You know, a lot of people, as you know, I'm an amateur historian. I'm just reread Caro's books about Lyndon Johnson, which is just a great read, but they're tomes. And now I'm reading Patriarch about Joe Kennedy, which is fascinating as a person who's on my mother's side was Irish Catholic, Boston. So I got off on a diatribe here. Refresh my memory.
Judiciary.
Judiciary, yeah. So when you look at Franklin Roosevelt and court packing, an interesting historical note, when he went and threatened to enlarge the makeup of the court, it was 5-4. You probably know this. The New Deal and one of the glaring bills that's unbelievable. When the Democrats tried to institute protections over child labor, because 12 and 14-year-olds were getting injured, and there was no protection for child labor or minimum wage or average workday, the Supreme Court said that the legislation in the 40s, 30s to protect children was unconstitutional because it was against the interstate commerce law. So largely in a response, Roosevelt said, God damn it, well, I'm going to do legislation that'll increase the votes. Historians frequently say that was a failure by Roosevelt, but it created a very famous expression that all of us who are old enough can remember this. The expression was a switch in time saved 9. And that was a switch by, oddly enough, a justice who had voted in the affirmative denying child labor laws. He switched to then support another challenge to that. And his name was Roberts. So the more things change, the more they say the same. So saying that you want to look at an institution that has had the same makeup since the inception of this country, I think is a reasonable thing. Why can't we have a conversation about that? And at the very least, it sends a message to the bench. And we know the polling numbers that the American public, when they start to hear about this and they realize that, the Koch brothers and the Ellis thing, they have been very active about packing the courts for 30 years. So yes, I support it. We should look at it. And at the worst that'll happen is we'll have a conversation and more people will become knowledgeable about the fact that the Supreme Court is a political institution often used by the far right.
We have a comment about the Fairness Doctrine again. It's from Jeffrey Mann. Jeffrey, could you tell us your comment?
Hi, it's Jackie Garcia here.
Okay, Jackie Garcia, yes.
Yeah, hi.
Go Bears.
Go Bears.
I had a lot of trouble with the Fairness Doctrine because, I think it delayed action on climate for 30 years because there was always a denier to speak against somebody who was speaking on the scientific facts. And, even saying that 100,000 scientists supported climate change and there were only a few, maybe 1,000 in the world who thought it was a natural cycle or not man-made. Those are the voices that got heard. They got amplified, even though they were a very, very small minority. So, there's fairness, but there's also spreading of disinformation not based on science.
Yeah, I would, especially when it comes to climate. A good model for this is the tobacco industry. They use the Fairness Doctrine and the Tobacco Institute. I've had, my involvement with Juul didn't come out of nowhere. It was because when I was in the Concord City Council, we passed a piece of legislation that I introduced that banned secondhand smoke in restaurants. Made me very unpopular with a lot of my customers, by the way, back when I was in the restaurant business. So there are examples like that. On climate, partially because Reagan got rid of it before we really got into these discussions. But I think your point's well taken. I tend to believe that if everybody gets to express themselves and the voters are reasonably well educated, then you have to have faith in the voters at some point. The Tobacco Institute is probably one of the premier examples of a industry that misled based on evidence-based research for a long time. And we know from Exxon now, something I've been very engaged in with Ted Lieu from Southern California. He and I got engaged when we were freshmen, when we got those whistleblower reports that they knew about climate change and actually spent millions of dollars on retrofitting a super tanker to look at sequestration. And then they denied it. So your point is well taken. And I think maybe that's something we should consider when we look at the Fairness Doctrine. You do get to the point of anticipating constitutional challenges. It is a fine art. John Sarbanes and I have talked about this a lot on HR 1 and voting rights. You got to get it passed, but then you got to get it past the courts. So there is a balance here. But I do think that we are in a crisis when it comes to accurate information, and climate's a perfect example. We just had a hearing at Rules on a bill that Scott Peters introduced that would just reinstate what the Obama administration did on methane capture. And you would think the Republicans, I mean, I almost died of 911. This guy, Buddy Carter, who I work with, was flailing his arms. You're going to kill the fossil fuel industry. And I'm like, dude. You know, and Tom Cole, who's a Republican from Oklahoma, he was talking about, you're going to kill the fossil fuel industry. You know, they're going to kill, the fossil fuel industry is going to kill the goddamn planet. What are you missing about weather in Oklahoma and Texas and the Gulf? And us,
they get to kill us. They get to kill us and our children and our children's children and every other living thing.
Right.
But yes.
And you know, and part of it is the incrementalism of climate change. People are losing their lives. Migration is connected to climate change, but you'll never hear Republicans talk about, oh, the crisis at the border. The reason why Guatemalans are spending $2,000 that they don't have in life savings to give to organized crime to get their family to the border is because their crops are failing. So, and there's corruption and other things, but the urgency of climate change isn't some academic thing, as you know, 20 or 30 or 10 years out from now. It's right now. People are losing their lives right now. And you know, we are all threatened by this. So I am sympathetic. This is a good point. We should work on it more.
Yeah. It's nice that the Pope has recognized the importance of climate change.
Please, let's not get off on the American Conference of Bishops. I will explode. And Joe Biden.
Anna, I think you have a question. You're on mute.
Oh yeah, I got you. Hi, Mark. So great to see you. You're looking fantastic. Great. Real quick, because it's got to do with the infrastructure, which looks like they're going to go forward on 2 tracks. And this comes from 2 people, which I've been trying to talk to, quite a few people in not only my neighborhood, but my group of friends and so forth. But my very, very conservative in-laws from Maine and Boston brought up the fact that if this whole infrastructure deal goes through, that what Biden and the Democrats will do is tax our assets. Well, I was kind of skeptical about that, because how can you tax assets when you really, how do you measure assets when you haven't sold things, right? So number one, that was one of the things that I didn't understand. And I was trying to go back and forth with them, but then I thought, can't change people's mind. They'll have to figure it out themselves. Second thing, and this comes from a very progressive friend of mine who, we all live in the Bay Area, and Biden's whole thing about taxing only people making more than $400,000 a year. Now, granted, as an immigrant, $400,000 to me is a lot of money, but to our kids who live here and work 2 jobs, $400,000 is not that much. So 2 questions there. Can assets be taxed? And second, how does California fit into the 400, taxing at 400,000 to pay for what we really all want and need?
So this is really boring and complicated, but it has real effects. And it's interesting that your conservative friends, is what the Republican think tanks have fed them is that their assets are going to be taxed.
Right.
Right. And what the Biden administration suggested, and I completely support them, is merely getting rid of the loopholes that Trump and the Republicans passed when they did their tax reform bill, which added fuel to the fire of inequality. So the 400,000, we got to measure apples to apples. It's on I'm a co-author of a wealth tax by Juan Vargas, colleague and friend from Southern California. Very Joseph Stiglitz, all progressive, Krugman support that. The reason for that is a lot of you have heard, and I won't go into detail. When you look at the separation of capital versus wages in our economy, and this is what Picardy writes about, it's a recipe for revolution and disaster. You can't have this disparity of wealth and have a successful democracy. And there's nothing wrong with capital, but when it gets out of whack with wages and with working income, so you can tax assets, capital assets, in a variety of ways. So they're right in that way. But what Biden is focused on is just eliminating what they did by taking the corporate, the minimum, I'm spacing on it, but it was in the Reagan years, Nixon years, it was like 30%, and then it went down to 21%. I think it's now 21%. That's just the average. When you put in the loopholes and the tax deductions, that's why people like Warren Buffett and Jeff Bezos, on their income, including investment income, they didn't pay any taxes on income tax. So all of this gets deliberately complicated from people who don't want you to know the truth. This is why, to some degree, a flat tax was nice for people because everybody could understand it. But people have gamed the system for too long. So this is another area where I think, Brody, we should follow up with all of you. You know, we've got a really good website that we constantly update on the policy side. We're a little weaker on the politics side. So getting you this information so you can digest it in chunks that are more than just me answering complicated questions to complicated issues. And then you can digest and ask me questions. So Brody, maybe, you know, we've been doing this for a long time, but how we intersect with these would be really helpful. And then the last point, you can go out and help us explain to our, all of us have those cranky conservative Republicans in our closet. It will help give you information that might make them stop and think, that because they're being used. And this concentration of wealth, you know, January 6th, as bad as it was a symptom of a much worse problem in this country. If we don't start to address this, Picardy's right. I mean, there's an inevitability to the history that if we don't address it, there's going to be real problems. And Biden understands it. He's really, and yeah, Yellen understands it too.
Yeah, but you know, Mark, the other thing is that they don't understand that Trump and the Republicans took away a lot of the middle class deductions, right? So, you know, we end up paying more on our taxes because our deductions, you know, like our housing deduction, all of the child tax credits, whatever we had, were taken away from us and given to corporations and the wealthiest of the wealthiest. So therefore, yes, our assets, supposed assets, were taxed more so under Trump than what will be done under any of the Biden.
See, the Congressional Budget Office has analyzed the consequences 2 years, 3 years after that tax cut, that they said, oh, it'll trickle down. Speaking of Ronald Reagan, everybody will benefit. That all the research shows, the wealthier you are, the more you keep the resources. You spend it on billion-dollar yachts and whatnot, and middle-income people spend it. It goes back into the economy. This is the Stiglitz-Krugman argument that is not an opinion, it's research. So this is what we're fighting over. You know, and these folks, the Ayn Randian, you know, Paul Ryan, Koch brothers, they believe this stuff. They don't believe average people are capable of governing themselves. I mean, I don't know why you'd be an American if you didn't believe that. Mm-hmm. So they think they're the enlightened Ayn Randian few and everybody else is suckers. And I've always said it's a twofer when they lie to us and get us to vote against our own interest, because then they go back and say, see, we were right. We just lied to those people and they voted against their own interest. Let's take more of their money.
Right. Yeah. Mark, I'm glad to hear that the Congress has a wealth tax. Is it similar to the wealth tax proposed by Elizabeth Warren?
Yes.
Oh, good.
The
Oh,
House
good.
has- the
Wonderful.
House has a version. I know Juan was the original author. So, you know, in the context of
Okay.
collegiality and who takes it first, there are other versions of it, but they're all similar. It's the same vein.
Okay.
But, you know, how you get that passed with reconciliation, which is a whole other discussion. I mean, the filibuster was set up to advantage the South.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, I have very little sympathy.
Right.
Yeah, they'll turn around and use it against us, but they use it against us anyways. So when we got 51 votes, we don't have a filibuster in the House of Representatives. Why should they have it? I mean, why does Wyoming have 2 goddamn US senators with a smaller population by 200,000 than the county of Contra Costa? And we get 2 US senators for 40 million people. Come on. That was set up as part of this country's history and the Civil War and Reconstruction to favor people who were former slave owners. Let's be real about this. Get rid of the goddamn filibuster. Majority rules.
You
You
agree?
already cheat. You already cheat in the you already cheat when it comes up to the makeup of the U.S. Senate. You cheat on the Electoral Congress. You institutionalized slavery and racism in this country, in my view. I mean, we've gotten rid of slavery, but racism is alive and well.
We agree. We agree. Lawrence Abbott, you have a question for Mark DeSaulnier?
Yeah, just real quick. In the past, you've co-sponsored House Joint Resolution 48, the We the People Amendment, and just hoping you'll co-sponsor that again. And the question is, will you?
If we haven't, we will.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. So Taylor's on this call on her own time. So we'll have a sort of after action report on what you brought up, how I responded to it. And again, Brody, maybe we can create a little infrastructure with you. And Katie, I'd love to do this. So, you know, we use technology to be as connected with you folks as possible. So when you have these questions, you can access. And as things change, you can get that information. Because I know you will love this stuff. You're hopelessly addicted to citizenship.
We have a question from a recent college graduate. Chris Breed, would you like to ask your question or your comment and your question?
Yeah. Hi, I just wanted to ask another climate related question. I especially regards to the proposal for a modern day civilian climate corps. Just thinking about something like that, I am a recent college graduate and I would jump at the opportunity to work doing something like installing CCC or installing clean energy or reforesting all the old growth forests that, you know, I've grown up loving and now I see burned down every year. And I just want to know if this made it into the bipartisan infrastructure package. And regardless if it did, are you supportive of the expanded and improved CCC that AOC and Ed Markey have introduced?
Yes, I think it's a great idea. We have other legislative models. We do this in teaching. And Betty DeVos was, I think she should be in jail for what she did. Young people would agree in that legislative model, a bill signed by President Obama, passed by the Congress, signed into law, that directed the Department of Education to forgive anyone who took loans and went into teaching after 10 years. Their loans would be forgiven if they had taught in Teach for America or in low-income schools. She, I think, and we had hearings on this and brought her in. Oh my God, I was ready to jump over the podium. They just willfully ignored it. I think of like 1% of the kids who applied for forgiveness were actually given it. And the statute was very clear. So we have a model on this, is my point, that are applicable. And I think it's a great idea. Get young people to be able to do this, incentivize it so your student debt could be deferred or forgiven, or give you credits like the California Conservation Corps, where you could get jobs in the field after you've served some time doing this. And it's not a threat to union jobs either. If you do it right, it complements those. So good paying jobs by people who've passed apprenticeship programs can do project labor agreements on installing solar and wind. And then you can have young people clearing forests, doing that kind of work, learning to be firefighters if they choose, all those things. You can do both. So it's a great question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Jillian Elliott.
That name sounds familiar to me.
That's right.
Mark, it's so lovely to see you.
Oh.
You sound great. And it's, yes, fills my heart.
Thank you for sending me on Facebook every once in a while. I don't go on very often, but the loyal defenders against the Trumpsters, I appreciate.
You know, you're right. You're right.
By
the way,
it's not a fair fight, but I appreciate it.
I'm not sure on which side. We have the brains. They have shamelessness.
Yes.
But before I get on my question, as we're talking about ways to do forgiveness, I hope that a lot of these doctors and nurses who helped during COVID are able to write off their hundreds of thousands of dollars of student debt. It's just, I know enough ER docs who are up to their ears in it. And, you know, it's just so hateful to hear people like say, oh, it's all a hoax. I've lost 4 people to that hoax. Anyway, what I wanted to ask is around the investigation that Speaker Pelosi has called into the insurrection. And I'm wondering, what kind of authority does it actually have? I mean, to me, the insurrection was largely about people who have been manipulated into feeling like they're losing their privilege. And it's about race. It's really, I think, I mean, it's all about fear and manipulation. And I look at it and I think, if it's us against them, which I hate to think in those terms, they're armed, we're not. But they're actually using it. So what happened on January 6th was a nightmare. And I'm hoping that this committee, or whatever this is going to be, is going to have some authority, and that it gets a lot of TV time. I really think that I was young when Watergate happened, but it was compelling television. And I think that Jamie Raskin was compelling television. And I think that the American people really are manipulated. And we have 2 Americas. You've got Fox News and you've got the rest of the world. And so I want to know what your hopes are for this committee, and are you on it?
She hasn't filled the positions. My staff would.
You're already the busiest man in Congress.
I'm an eager person. I mean, she started a select committee on inequality, and she's like, "Are you interested?" And I'm like, my staff will kill me. And I would love to be on that committee. It's a real problem, though, and it's an indication of how they're going to behave, and they already do behave. And this isn't Watergate anymore. That's not the Republican Party that I serve. No. I mean, you don't have any Howard Bakers anymore.
No.
The idea of Sam Ervin and Howard Baker sitting there and being focused on what did he know and when did he know it, these folks aren't capable of, I don't think. I wish they would. I thought they would change after Trump left. I thought a lot of them, just in personal conversations, I thought, that they'd be happy to be rid of him, but that's not what's happened.
No, you work with Jim Jordan.
He's a very disturbed, I mean, he really is. On January 6th, I caught him in a hallway on the phone with Lee Selden, who's another Freedom Caucus guy, and Matt Gaetz. And I've often thought, I wondered what they were talking about, because I had watched Jordan walk across the secure room that we were all in as the insurrection was still going on. And I've often wondered who he was talking to, because he's capable of having been part of all that. So I think that what Nancy's doing is what is available to us. I will tell you what they will do. They will pack it with Jim Jordan's Paul Gosar's the craziest of the crazy. They will interrupt, they will scream, and they will deflect, and they'll say that we are, it's these people who believe Antifa attacked the Capitol. White people didn't attack the Capitol. So, this is a problem for us. I was, and because I'm on oversight, they do this a lot in oversight.
Yeah, they're sound bites. They're Fox sound bites.
But they're, that crazy green woman, everybody said, oh, she's awful. She raised $3 million in the first 3 months she was in Congress by being a complete jerk. So this is the world we live in, and it's very unfortunate. I was, excuse me, a long hearing of oversight today that Carolyn Maloney held over maternal leave, or family leave. And I may have told you this. I made the comment, I was thinking of my mother, because these guys just kept beating up on Carolyn, the Republicans. And at the end, I said, my Irish mother used to tell me and my 3 brothers that weak men attack strong women. And one of the panelists went, oh, wow. But it was so true. So unfortunately, those are the dynamics that they're playing, that they're setting up, is to say, we're the ones that are being partisan, that we're taking things out of context. So this is the world we're in. And folks, we got to be fully engaged. They fight dirty. We're not going to fight the way they do, but we're going to be more determined and more ethical.
So when or how do Democrats decide to put democracy ahead of bipartisanship?
Every day.
Okay.
Every day. I mean, I am challenged by this. I have a couple initiatives that I reached out. I mean, I got a lot of legislative efforts passed into law when we were in the minority because Virginia Fox is a very conservative, the ranking member at Education Labor. We have a very nice relationship. And she says, you're as crazy as your predecessor, just as liberal as can be. And I'm like, yeah, Virginia, I know. And you're just as crazy as Confederate generals who, but I'm having a real problem with keeping those relationships after January 6th, after people who I had respect for prior to that, who voted against certifying the election the same day with no evidence. So this is a real conundrum, is how do you continue to function? And, I just tell my staff, I'm challenged by 2 quotes that I love. One by Lincoln when I think it was Chase or Seward who was saying at the end of the Civil War, they said, Lincoln, don't you know you got to destroy your enemies? And Lincoln said, don't you think I destroy my enemies by making them my friends? So there's that sort of Lincoln wisdom, but then Dante's admonition that the hottest places in hell are reserved for people who in times of moral challenge reserve their neutrality. So I am literally day by day challenged by how I continue to be effective, but still live up and not feed the beast. It's a real problem.
Thank you so much. Things are so weird that I'm quoting Joe Stalin these days when he's, the quote I'm going to say. He said, those who cast the votes decide nothing. Those who decide the votes decide everything. And that's what Republicans are doing right now.
Yeah. And look what he believed in.
Yeah.
He didn't believe in average people having the wisdom to govern themselves.
It's awfully good to see you. It's great to hear you.
Sorry to go on so long. This is free therapy for me. I get to talk about things I really care about with people who actually care about the same thing and aren't intimidated by the fact that some of these things need more time than a sound bite.
Mark, we have a new member from the Ceremon Valley Democratic Club, and she has a question. Christina.
Welcome, Christina. You're hanging around with good people.
Yes, I can see that. And it's very nice to meet you. And I've really enjoyed listening to you for the last hour. So I have a question kind of going back to what you said in your opening remarks about, working on the opiate crisis. And I think, that during the pandemic, alcohol skyrocketed, but it was already, if even prior to the pandemic, alcohol was already actually outnumbering opiates in the number of deaths per year. And that's been actually reported for several years now. And so I have a lot of friends in the industry, people in recovery, people really challenged. You know, I have a friend of mine who's an addiction doctor pretty high up at Stanford. And she said, I've never been busier in my life. And that was in the beginning. And so, and I've also read that, you know, what they call big alcohol, because it's really a number of like 5 companies really that make up everything that people drink off the shelves of the grocery stores and liquor stores, really took that playbook out of big tobacco. I mean, that's really what they started mirroring. And so I still see a lot of focus, like from a policy standpoint about opiates, but is there any discussion? I mean, especially like the Atlantic's been like pouring out articles about this, which has been great to see that somebody's starting to pay attention other than just the medical and the recovery field. But, you know, what is your take on big alcohol? Or is that just too big to chew right now with all the other issues? But the reality is, you know, and I was talking to, she said, we're in the middle of a pandemic with another epidemic going on.
Yep.
You know, and the number of parents who were drinking and homeschooling their kids, and you know, it's a big problem. And I'd love to just kind of hear your thoughts about it, what are people talking about, you know, in the circles or that circles that you work in. So.
Well, since you're new, I'll give you a little history. The older people with gray hair, remember my previous career. I was a liquor license holder since I think I started when I was 25. I owned restaurants with very significant bar revenue. And that's where you made the money. I mean,
where you make your money.
Made the money on your well vodka, and everything else sort of. Robert Mondavi was great on this stuff when I was part of this in my other career when we started the Food and Wine Institute in Copia, which is still wonderful. You know, he wanted to change Americans' approach to alcohol, and it was do the Mediterranean approach. So the Spanish, the French, the Italians, the Greeks, they have lower alcoholism rates, even though they consume more than the English, the Germans, and the United States. And the reason's pretty compelling is, and we inherited this from, as we inherited many things from the English, Northern Europeans stored food to survive. Southern Europeans were cultivating food all the time. In my previous life as a Berkeley restaurant owner and friend of Chez Panisse, and have had many wonderful conversations with Alice Waters about these things. So their whole idea was, let's get Americans to have a relationship with liquor, at least the way other Mediterranean cultures was. And their whole theory was, if we can start in California, because we have the same climate, we use the outdoors, we generally, even then, we liked fresh food. We didn't like large agricultural food. Unfortunately, it's worked somewhat, but it hasn't worked well. In this book, Diseases of Despair, and Atlantic's written about this. The 2 authors is a husband, wife. I think they're Harvard Medical School. I just had an event with them. It's so depressing, you know, because alcohol, they targeted people who are isolated. They targeted people by education, by race, both African Americans and white people. And they knew where they were marketing. You know, the United States of America is the only country, I think, in the world that allows hard liquor to be advertised on TV, along with New Zealand. So we didn't used to do that either. So this is a real problem. My dad was an alcoholic. He committed suicide. It's a field that I've spent a lot of time on, and it's all of these components. And we're learning so much, as I've said, about behavioral health, neuroscience, stress, depression, the use of depression. Unfortunately, the private sector is ahead of us. And one of the sad parts I've learned about being a politician is there are some people with a lot of money who are sociopaths. And unfortunately, historically, they've been in the tobacco industry, they've been in the wine industry, and the hard liquor industry. So it's a big, big issue. It's been a big issue for me all of my life before my dad died. And we're doing a lot of research around this. The National Institutes for Health, and I've been a big advocate for this on their funding. We can change addictions and how the brain works and how those chemicals modify our brain. But right now it's worse because of social media, targeting, and the sophistication of the private sector working on the neuroscience we've learned. And we're behind them in setting rules and regulations. In the meantime, people are suffering, they're getting more addicted, they're dying, they're losing their houses. And it's just like domestic violence. It carries over generationally. So the sooner you start to change it, the sooner you start healing. If you want to have a continued conversation, it's a subject matter you can tell it's near and dear to my heart. Behavioral health.
For a very number of reasons, and like you, I have a personal, so it's something I keep very close tabs on.
You know, and we did a good job in California and in California. I was very active in the restaurant bar business when Mothers Against Drunk Driving started. And, I remember just saying, I don't want to make my living off of people going out and killing somebody in their car. So God knows we've still got a lot of work to do, but that was a pretty significant movement, making people aware. And one of the things we did in California was, it used to be that you only held the licensee responsible. And we changed it to make it everybody. So I remember having staff meetings with my staff and just said, if you have any doubt, you are legally responsible to say, I can't serve you anymore. Same for liquor stores. If they had somebody came staggering in, it was the licensee's responsibility, but it was also the person who sold it. And it made a difference. Not enough, but those kind of things. Yeah, really, Christine, you've come to the right place. Let's work together on it.
Okay.
We worked with a wonderful doctor. I'm not going to mention his name just because I don't know about the privacy issues, and his kids about the jewel issue, because he saw what they were doing and he brought it to my attention. And it made a real impact on what we're doing in Congress about vaping. So similarly, and on opioids, it was two constituents who brought that to me, who had lost children. Someone who lived in Danville and San Ramon, and they've become national advocates for it. So you can make a difference.
Okay.
Takes too damn long, but it's worth fighting for.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking on that issue. I'd like to continue on.
Yeah. Taylor, one more thing for us to do.
A
new friend.
Does anyone have any other questions? I think we have gone through our questions, and Mark, you answered them so magnificently and gave us your insights, and we're so thankful for you being here. Thank you so much for coming and answering all our questions and talking to us.
Sorry, I'm such a blabbermouth. I'm trying to get better about being succinct, but when you have an audience that's paying attention and asks provocative questions, it's hard for me not to.
No, we like to hear everything you have to say. It's wonderful. So thank you again for being here.
My pleasure. And Brody, let's follow up on how we can be better connected in real time.
Yes, I would love to do that. That would be great. We're interested.
Thank you all. Be good. Keep fighting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, does anyone have any discussion?
Thanks for doing that. It was really good to see Mark. It was great to hear him. And you always have great speakers, but this was, it was especially lovely to see Mark.
Yeah, we haven't had Mark in a long time speak for a while, and so for a long time. So I'm so glad we're able to have him speak, but he's very generous with his time to do that. Yes.
Brody, would you like me to stop recording?
Oh, yes, please stop recording.
Okay.
I should have done that. I forgot.
No problem.